Here we are at 3:05. So welcome everyone to CEP Community Live. This is a weekly webinar hosted by us at the Cognitive Empowerment Program. The CEP is a research study at Emory University, partnered with Georgia Tech, in which a person with mild cognitive impairment and their care partner participate in several hours of educational programming. And our programming includes cognitive training, physical training, nutrition, support groups, and a host of other topics, and looking to empower those participants and build a sense of community and hopefully decrease their symptoms. So this webinar is an opportunity to give a free sample of the classes that we provide here at the Cognitive Empowerment Program, and anyone on the internet has access to. And so I will be posting information in the chat about how you can join or get access to the CEP Community Live weekly webinars, as well as get affiliated with our program. And so I'm going to go ahead and start the introduction for our presenter today. She is a crowd favorite, I must add. For those of you who join weekly, I'm sure you already know. And for our newcomers, you're in for a treat. Our very own Megan Nare from the Cognitive Empowerment Program is our advanced yoga instructor who has been working in the clinical setting at the Cognitive Empowerment Program for the past 3 years. She approaches her work with a background in trauma-informed chair yoga and with neurodiverse populations and accessible practices for the aging body. And that's a mouthful. And to sum all that up, she's just awesome. And you're going to enjoy this presentation. Not a yoga exercise today, but a presentation on self-compassion and MCI. And so in the process of experiencing early stage memory loss, it is common to be angry or even in denial about the diagnosis. And so this can be true for some affected by the memory issues or their care partners as well, their loved ones. Studies show that for many people on the road to acceptance, self-compassion offers a bridge to a happier, healthier life with mild cognitive impairment. So Megan will be sharing research about self-compassion and coping strategies for improving, resilience and finding joy, as well as having a peaceful purpose after life's big challenges. So again, a mouthful. And at this point, I'll go ahead and let Megan take it away as she is the expert. And Megan, take it away.
Thanks, Victoria. I was thinking that if you came today thinking that we were going to do yoga, that my jacket is a sign that we're doing a talk today instead. So, a lot of times in our yoga program at the Cognitive Empowerment Program, we talk about this like big, lofty idea that comes up a lot in early stage memory loss or even middle or late stage experience of the hardship, how hard it can be to be in the changes that occur after a really big diagnosis or a really big life shift. And we talk about this thing, acceptance, that maybe you've been with me before and heard me talk about in some of our yoga classes or some of the other talks that we've given. And one of the things that I was thinking a lot about the past 6 months is that it's hard to get to a place of acceptance without this big key piece of compassion. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that means. And it's not really necessarily from my perspective. We're talking from the perspective of researchers, how compassion, how self-compassion specifically can really alter the course of a big diagnosis or a big life change. So I'm excited to see some people that are familiar on the participants list. It's really good to be together. And if you haven't met me yet, I'll tell you a little bit about my work, about where this topic came from, and just kind of share a little bit about some of the reflections that, the past 3 years of working in the cognitive empowerment program, what it's kind of taught us as a group of people who are experiencing early stage memory loss. And I don't care who you are, where you're at in your life, every single person I know knows someone who is experiencing the changes that can happen when your memory just doesn't work the way that it used to. And so this is a title that I'm titling Embracing Life's Challenges, Self-Compassion and MCI. And this is a discussion not just for people with mild cognitive impairment, but for their loved ones, for their family and friends, especially maybe someone who who's having a really hard time with that acceptance piece. This may be a good talk that just kind of sheds a little bit of light on being compassionate with their experience as well. So, one of the things that I think is really common that we've seen in the cognitive empowerment program is this response of harsh self-judgment or even criticism, being really hard on oneself. And because there's so much pain and hardship after a diagnosis, some of this even kind of gets built up over time. And maybe the type of struggle that gets built up over time where it gets bigger and more consuming. And a lot of times some of these big ideas like acceptance and compassion only come into play when we're totally done and over struggling, especially when it happens, all day long or part of the day long, and we're looking for an alternative to that. What's the alternative to me being angry or upset about the things I cannot change? And that's what we'll talk a little bit about that today. Sometimes those big life changes, they can really do a number on us physically, spiritually, emotionally. And sometimes it even causes us to have these big moments of even losing faith in ourselves and our situation, losing faith in some of the expectations that we may have had. And even for some of us, coming to a place that feels really hopeless from time to time, this idea of wishing things were different than they are. So we'll unpack that a little bit, especially if you've been in a place in your life or somebody who's been in a place in their life where all those challenges build up in a way that we get kind of stuck on autopilot a little bit. And compassion, acceptance, those can be tools that help us kind of turn off or move forward from that place of suffering or from that place of hardship or judgment. And if you've been there before, it can also be a place that feels really separate from the rest of the world or the rest of the people that we love. And oftentimes, memory loss, a big diagnosis, a big change in your family is something that can be so isolating. And oftentimes I say we think, oh, no one could possibly understand. And so what's the answer? The good news is that we do have some capacity to change that when that happens, that it's backed up by research. And there really are ways, tools and coping mechanisms that we can use to stop some of that harsh judgment and some of that criticism that we can run into on the road to, life's big challenges. So it seems oversimplified that we might just do that by changing our thoughts or by coming to the present moment. But, today we're going to talk a lot about Dr. Kristen Neff, who's a researcher who really supports this notion that compassion can be life-changing, especially for chronic disease states. And it's just about this idea of coming to a place where we're not resisting so much what's actually true in our lives, what's really happening in our lives. And we'll talk about how that can help us embrace life's changes and challenges. Okay, so let's jump to the next slide. If you haven't met me before, this is my yoga room at the Cognitive Empowerment Program. We have a physical center at Emory where we bring in participants 1 day a week to do these classes, everything from Tai Chi to yoga, nutrition classes. We have occupational therapists and even in cognitive training that we do with our folks. And so I've been at Emory the past 3 years working on this accessible yoga program. We do chair yoga. And the thing about it is, this new healthcare model is starting to really open up the possibilities of what is possible, not just when we change things physically or mentally, but also like emotionally and spiritually. So the talk that we're going to have today is kind of a talk about that realm of things, a little bit more abstract. So we'll talk about that as we get into this idea of self-compassion. And this is a framework, if you've been with us in our classes, with our Live Well sessions, with our therapists and our social workers, one of the things that we talk a lot about is this framework for coping with early stage memory loss. And people who experience and receive a diagnosis of early stage memory loss, or what we will refer to a lot as mild cognitive impairment or MCI, that first experience of being in the doctor's office can be so overwhelming. The weeks and the months and even the years that follow, a lot of times it can leave us without a way to process. And, thinking about that, there's this idea that emotional adjustments are just as important in this work as places that we can address lifestyle issues and practical coping strategies. But all the things we'll be talking about today will be kind of in this category of emotional adjustment. It's this idea that in people with early stage dementia or MCI, that we really want to work towards accentuating the positive. There's so much grief and uncertainty a lot of times in the unknown that it's a really important skill set with MCI to be able to focus on resilience and wellness and recovery. That even in spite of this new change in your life, there's still so much to lean into and look forward to. So we'll be talking a little bit about some of those ways that we can do that. Acceptance, these ideas that, we might lose a little sense of who we are. Who am I if I don't drive my car around and have access to a driver's license anymore? Who am I without my job that I've had for the past, 30, 40 years? Those things can all really affect the way that we think about our identity. And so for that reason, expressing feelings, it sounds so simple, but it can be a really big tool for some of these emotional adjustments and finding new ways to relate to other people and resilience along the way are some of the things that we'll unpack in our conversation today. So with that in mind, there's really special challenges that can happen in the early stages of memory loss. And, acceptance is one of the things that we talk a lot about in the program. But I really want to underline here that acceptance is something that we can't force, that will come in its own time. For some people, acceptance is a really long road, and there's a lot of reasons why they may not ever get down to where they want to be in understanding and acknowledging where they're at. And for some people, that may not be the goal. And if you find yourself being that person where you're not working towards acceptance and really this resilience factor, some of the things that we share today may not be as relevant to you. But it's really important to understand if you're someone who knows someone with these challenges of mild cognitive impairment that, we say, if you know one person with dementia, you know one person with dementia, that everyone's journey is extremely unique. And it's really up to each and every single individual to determine the way that they want that journey to go. So I just want to start out this conversation with really empowering you, especially if you are experiencing a life after a diagnosis of memory loss, that there's really, you get to craft the way that the road looks ahead. And acceptance can be a big piece to finding peace and joy along that way, especially if it's been a big, big, big challenge with some of these things, like relating to others and really thinking about, who we are now. So everybody deserves time to work through that at their own rate, with their own feelings, and be in the truth of that. And so this conversation about compassion is really kind of what can be possible when we turn towards the truth around some of these monumental issues. Big issues like losing independence, big facing these disease progression realities. And that can be a really, really hard place to be in. And it can sometimes lead to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, this spiritual crisis. And what do we do when that happens? So there may be a reason that you want to establish some new goals in your life, working towards finding new meaning and purpose, finding a new way to feel good about who we are and express our feelings, both positive and negative. I want to emphasize about our situation, that really comes from an attitude of being strong and capable, and letting others know that we want to be treated with respect. And these all come from Dr. Robin Yale's book about counseling in early stage dementia. So I just want to give her credit for these. And if you find yourself really lost, having a hard time reorienting life after a big diagnosis or life change, some of these new goals that you see in front of you may stand out to you as somewhere to really sink your attention, especially if you feel like, I'm the only one. Nobody can possibly understand how I feel. Sometimes that really gets us deeper into our feelings of feeling disconnected. And self-compassion, on the other hand, really allows us to see the related experiences of ourselves and others without feeling isolated and disconnected. One of the ways that shows up at the Cognitive Empowerment Program is people coming into a room where everybody in that room is experiencing life with MCI or a loved one with MCI. And it's really amazing what happens when you come into a group where you don't have to be guarded, where you can really be accepted by everybody and not have to make these disclaimers about forgetting things. It's really healing to realize that, I'm not the only one. There's a whole community of people who understand, especially even care partners who understand. It can be isolating to be a care partner in this journey as well. So with that in mind, I want to kind of open up a little question to the group, and I want you guys to respond in the chat. I love this picture of this little boy and this dog. Is there someone in your life who you've known at some point in time who has offered you unconditional love and acceptance? That no matter what you did or where you went or what you got into, that you could show up and be with this person and they would love and support you and be really encouraging of you no matter what. And this may be somebody that you knew and maybe has since passed on to, not be someone that you can see in this life anymore. Or maybe it's someone who's still with us, or maybe it's someone who is like not a person, like a dog in this photo, which for many of us is like one of the first ways that we can relate to unconditional love is through that relationship of a pet. That even when my pet chews through pillows and brings animals into the house and things like that, that I'm still going to love and really kind of be unconditional with that person or with that thing. And for some of us, it's like grandchildren are the way that we get to experience that. For other, it's our memory of a grandparent. And I love some of these coming through in the chat. My sister, someone who could always show up with and is going to be along for the ride. Someone says, my mother who's passed away. And I love that sentiment, that memory of unconditional love and support. Ooh, this is a good one. My wife and cat. My best friend from junior high. Yes, my mom and my best friend who passed during COVID. It's really beautiful to be able to remember these people and the big impression that being loved purely, my pit bull that's made of pure sugar. I guess 3 friends and my husband. Yeah. And, some of us get to experience this for years and years and years. Other relationships, it's a short memory. But you might imagine that there's been times in your own life when things got really rough, or maybe even you were in a tough situation that was beyond your control, places, crossroads like divorce and death. You might imagine the words of encouragement that that person that you're thinking of would offer you. Even in a hardship that you're having in your life right now, you might imagine something that's been really difficult or coming up a lot with you, a way that you've been suffering, or maybe even sometimes we think of a way we've been feeling inadequate. And you might imagine the words that that person, that mom, best friend, dog, cat, or even the feeling of support that they would offer you. Maybe there's some phrases that come to mind that would almost be the words out of their mouth, or maybe it would just be a hug or an embrace. But you might imagine that there is some way that you have been able to touch or be with that unconditional love through them. And they probably wouldn't show up in that moment and say, oh my gosh, you really screwed that up, would they? And yet, oftentimes that is the way in which we relate to speaking with ourselves. And all of us have this inner dialogue that's kind of playing almost like a radio in the background throughout the day that responds to all of our thoughts and feelings and the things that happen in our lives. And when we talk about self-compassion, we're really talking about dealing with or addressing with or being with some of that self-criticism in a really honest way, the way that we would let them see us, that loved one see us. And, self-compassion and self-compassionate people recognize that being imperfect, that failing, going through hardships, experiencing life's difficulties, it is inevitable. And so they tend to be gentle with themselves when confronted with really painful experiences, rather than getting angry when life falls short of what our expectations of things should be. So you might imagine that unconditional love, this idea that when we're having self-compassion, that we're speaking to ourselves and relating to ourselves the same way that a loving friend would, with an unconditional friendliness. So what if self-compassion? Sometimes it can seem like, oh my gosh, I'm not just going to paint everything rosy and be ultra positive and it makes all my problems go away. And that certainly is not what I'm inviting you into. When I talk about self-compassion, when I talk about it, what I really mean is this mindfulness technique of this ability to extend understanding, acceptance, and kindness to ourselves in the same way we would extend it to others. I think a lot of the care partners in the groups, especially mothers, that we are so generous to give away compassion and kindness to everybody else, no matter what their circumstances. But for some reason, when it comes to giving that back to ourselves, it's a little problematic, especially if we haven't been practicing it much. And so when I say that self-compassion is a mindfulness technique, one of the things that I want to note is that it's something that takes practice. It can be very clumsy and very hard in the beginning, especially when it's a new practice. But with time and over time, it can be a way to start to give ourselves some space as we notice and bring tenderness to the ways in which we are experiencing suffering. So because of that, right here, it's not self-pity, it's not self-indulgence, it's giving yourself the same grace that you would want a really good friend to have. And the first step of that is just noticing that someone is suffering, or noticing that we are suffering. And the second thing that compassion involves is this response from your heart, from your emotions to that pain, that you want that pain to be eased. And certainly when a loved one suffers, that's what we want. We acknowledge how hard it is for them. And we wish for the easing of their suffering. And so it's bringing those same qualities into ourselves. We acknowledge how hard it's been. We're not ignoring it. We're not in denial of it, which is hard. And it may take a long time. It may take a lot of time to do that. But when we sense that there is something that is wounded or hurt, that we feel this emotion of caring and this desire to help soothe that suffering in some way. So rather than really judging someone harshly for the mistakes that they're made, we really understand and have kindness for what someone has been through. And it's that same thought towards ourselves. So we really kind of open up, just the same way that your loved one would to you, to this idea that being imperfect, that having changes like aging is part of this shared humanness. That as the same way we would want our friend in a difficult time not to just suck it up and bear through it and get over it, that we offer the same opportunity for ourselves to be loved, to be appreciated, to understand our shortcomings and the things that have changed. So when we think about the research for this, we talked a little bit earlier, I mentioned Dr. Kristen Neff, and she started out in her PhD work in the early 2000s researching self-compassion. And after she started this work, there was really an explosion of what the effects of self-compassion are. And she developed this self-compassion scale and started to really kind of work with how can this change the effects of chronic stress or chronic pain or chronic disease? And there was a huge meta-analysis about 20 other studies that were studied and all compared with each other that found this really large effect between self-compassion and its effects on depression, anxiety, and stress. And what we know from all these Brain Talk Live events and CEP Live events is that your heart health, your stress levels in your body are correlated to your brain health. So there's this negative relationship between self-compassion, and when it's down, it can really trigger a downfall into depression and anxiety. And when it's up, those stressors start to go down a little bit. So research suggests that self-compassion supports health-related behaviors and coping with illness. that it can really predict positive responses in the aging process and the elderly. A 2013 study by Allen and Leary found that this mindfulness technique of self-compassion can really help to buffer the experience of chronic pain and even chronic disease. They did a lot of work in the 2000s around HIV and self-compassion, and found that as they offered these techniques, that it could lower the stress and the anxiety. And something that happens a lot is also the stigma, which we know exists in the community of an experience of memory loss, is the stigma around the changes that are happening. So self-compassion training can really have a positive impact on these biomarkers in the body that are associated with aging and with disease. And so I really love that she starts to break down in her work the 3 key elements of self-compassion. And you can find more at her website, www.self-compassion.org. But she starts out with these 3 key elements. The first one is self-kindness, being kind to ourselves like we would a friend. The second one is that common humanity we talked about, that I'm not the only one, that there's someone else who can relate to me. There's a support group out there that knows what I'm going through, and that sharing my story is important because of that my story matters to others who are having the same experience of memory loss that I'm having. And the third one is mindfulness, which we'll talk a little bit more about what that means exactly. But going back to self-kindness, you might think about self-kindness in contrast with self-judgment. Self-kindness is the compassionate response, and self-judgment might be the really challenging, angry response that we might make as a reaction versus a response to a big diagnosis. So instead of criticizing ourselves, we recognize it's okay to make mistakes and that we can't avoid difficulties in life. Certainly, we can't avoid difficulties with aging. And so it means to give ourselves that little bit of grace instead of focusing on our imperfections or the way that we wish things were. And self-compassionate people recognize, being imperfect is a part of life. And I love this little picture, note to self, you rock. That instead of getting angry when life falls short, that we really turn towards being gentle with ourselves and even being affirmative with ourselves, which we'll talk a little bit about affirmations, as opposed to being in the dark or even in denial about things. The second one is common humanity. Everybody goes through hard times, and we're not alone when we face difficult experiences. So you might think about common humanity as the compassionate response versus isolation. Especially after 3 years of experiencing the pandemic, it's been even harder to relate to others or to get excited about getting out or doing support groups. But when we acknowledge that we are a group of a part of a larger population of people who are experiencing similar things to us, it can really help to get through hardship, especially when you're facing some of those more spiritual frustrations and wishing things were different. If only this were different, then I could be happy. And not allowing that conditional place of if only this were true, that we really kind of notice that we are part of a shared human experience of a larger thing that's happening versus you experiencing that alone. And then last, we have mindfulness. You might think of mindfulness as the opposite of judgment, that mindfulness is a non-judgmental place that we come to. Instead of acting or doing, when we come to things from a mindful perspective or a mindful breath or a mindful moment, that we are in a receptive state. So we're not trying to make our own actions or our own will happen, but we're in a place of just really observing our thoughts and our feelings, and allowing ourselves really to recognize what's happening now, what we're feeling, without suppressing or denying them. And so we might think about mindfulness, sometimes we say at CEP, as being with what is here and now without judgment, and acting, not just being receptive, that we also have a little sense of having some clarity to know how to move forward next. So mindfulness, we tend to get it caught up in negative thoughts and emotions in response to these really difficult changes in life. And mindfulness, taking a pause, coming to the present moment, helps us to put a little bit of distance between our thoughts and our emotions. So instead of being in denial or exaggerating, we really can step back and just notice that we're having those feelings without identifying or even over identifying that we are our feelings. And that's something that really comforts me in mindfulness, is this notion that I am not my feelings. I experience them in the moment. They're not going to stay here forever. But when we ignore our pain, oftentimes it can grow and grow and grow. And we know that what we pay attention to grows. Mindfulness teaches us that when we constantly return our thoughts to things like anger or resentment, that anger and resentment start to grow, that our thoughts can really feed that idea in our own mind. And the same thing is true for what happens when we turn our attention towards compassion, acceptance, is that instead of watering the weeds, as they say, that we start to water the fruitful blooms, the flowers in our life, things like our relationships, nurturing the things that bring us joy. And as much time as we spend in contemplating that tendency to be negative, that we start to turn our thoughts towards the equal weight of the positive side of things, or even the silver lining of things, so that we're not so caught up and swept away in some of our reactivity. So it really is about balancing sometimes some of our negative emotions so that they're not so exaggerated, they don't take center stage, and turning our perspective towards being a little more open, a little bit more present, and really just accepting things as they are. And one of the perspectives that we talk a lot about in mindfulness is this idea that, things happen, that life happens. And you might also think about it happens, no matter how hard we try or how lucky we may be, there's always something or somebody that is going to change and cause us stress or suffering, that change is inevitably a part of life. So, it's self-compassion is not self-pity. We're embracing the change, even the ones that we can't control, even the ones that are hard, that we know that everything changes and that it's not personal. A lot of suffering stems from us taking a big diagnosis or a big life change as something that is personal, as opposed to something that is a human experience. And self-compassion is not self-esteem. Self-esteem is something that wavers and wanes based on things being good or things being bad, or, this happening or looking a certain way. Self-esteem is really conditional in that way. But self-compassion is not. Self-compassion is always present. It's always available to us. And it's also our birthright to be able to experience joy, compassion, and care in a way that is unwavering, that doesn't change, that's unconditional. So with all that, you might be thinking, okay, cool, but how do I apply this to my life? And we talked a lot about negative thinking. And if you find yourself someone who struggles with self-kindness, with being kind to yourself, there may be something on the screen that resonates with you. These affirmations are phrases that we can introduce to start to replace a negative thought with a positive one. And sometimes we're not replacing it, we're just balancing it out a little bit. So if you're someone who's into that harsh self-criticism, there might be one of these affirmations that is comforting to you. The first one is, it's okay to feel this way. I know this hurts. That might be something that we tell ourselves when we feel bad about expressing our feelings or being kind with ourselves. It's okay to feel this way. I know that this hurts. The second one is one that I quote all the time in our program. I am doing my best. I forgive myself. When things happened, I was doing the best that I could, the best that I knew how to at the time with all the information I had. And I forgive myself for all the ways that I'm not perfect and that I don't get to show up and be a superhuman. The next one is, I will grow through this, and it's okay to feel this way. That anybody who is also experiencing the same thing that you're up against would be feeling the same way. And it is okay to feel that way. It's okay to really acknowledge the way that you feel, and to also know that it is part of a growth process where things aren't going to be stagnant and the same always. So that second element of self-compassion we mentioned was common humanity. And here are some affirmations you might put a little post-it note in the mirror in the bathroom if any of these really resonate. And we'll record the session, it'll be up on YouTube. This one is huge. I am not alone. There is an entire community of people who've gone through and who've been through what I'm going through. I am not alone. There are other people who know what this is like. There are other people who've suffered through this, and I'm part of that community. The next one is, I am only human. What a relief. I am only human. Everyone makes mistakes. I'm only human. Especially as we age and as things change that we cannot control, knowing that the expectation is not, they don't need to be perfect, that I'm only human. And what I'm experiencing is a human experience. The next one is one that I think is also equally as important. And this is really hard. This is really hard. And I'm going to get through this. This is really hard. And I'm going to get through this. And the last group of affirmations that we have relating to mindfulness, we mentioned this one earlier. I am not my thoughts. I am not my thoughts. Thank goodness I am not my thoughts. I'm so much more than my thoughts. I know this hurts. I'm not my thoughts, but I know this hurts. One that may be really helpful if you're stuck in resentment, or even if you're having a hard relationship problem with someone in your life. I can look at this from a different perspective. I can shift my perspective into a loving place and look at this with a little bit more gentleness, with a little bit more openness, with a little bit more compassion for myself, and also acknowledge the suffering that someone else is going through as well. Sometimes just acknowledging that suffering that another is going through can really give a lot of spaciousness around a relationship. And the last one is, my emotions don't define me. I'm bigger than how I feel right now. I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my emotions, and my emotions do not define me. I'm entitled to feel how I feel. And the more I accept myself, the more love and nurturing that I invite in, then things change. I don't have to change circumstances. My acceptance in itself will change circumstances. And that's a Carl Jung quote there. All right, so maybe one of these resonated. I'm kind of curious if you guys want to throw into the chat any responses that you have to any of these. And then the last thing that we'll do is, you couldn't get through one of our sessions without doing a little guided exercise. And so this is a guided exercise that I've been working with the past few weeks with our participants at CEP and some of our yoga and our mindfulness sessions. And again, it's a place that we can invite in compassionate thoughts to replace some of the negative, repetitive ones that we might be suffering with. All right, so you may have heard of tapping, which is something that we use a lot in our embodied trauma work in yoga. And we're going to start out, I'm going to show you a little tapping technique of bringing some fingers, 2 or 3, to the outside of the hand. Yeah. And then whatever hand you write with, whatever your dominant hand is, we're going to bring it right in between your eyebrows. And it's hard to think about something else or be somewhere else when we are doing these tapping. When you start to notice the feeling of your fingers, we're going to bring them to your outsides of your eyebrows here. And then go under the eye, under the nose, under the lip, to the collarbone, under the ribs, and then the top of the head. Yeah. So let's add those together with some of our positive affirmations back to the side of the hand. I'll say it first, and then you can say it to yourself, either out loud or silently at home. I am at peace. Over to the eyebrows. I am loved. Side of the eye. I am enough. Under eye. I am strong. Under the nose. I am confident. I am compassionate. I am kind. Under the ribs, I am perfectly imperfect. And then the top of head, I am beautifully me. And then just release your fingers to interlace in your lap, close your eyes just for one moment and call to mind that same person you first thought of that had that unconditional love for you in your life. You might take a moment just to imagine the encouraging words that they would offer you today. What would they say about the hardships and the ways that you're suffering right now? On your next inhale, stretch your arms up overhead, take a big reach up. Exhale, bring your hands all the way back through center. Start to rub your palms together with a little heat between your hands. And then get a little faster and closing your eyes. Cup your palms over your eyelids and just blink a few times. Notice the heat from your hands. And exhale to gently release. And that's one of the things that's hard to think about, some of the hard things when we come into turning our thoughts towards compassion or towards being open or more loving. And so thank you guys for even giving us a little shot of trying out some of those mindfulness practices. And I said it before, acceptance and compassion is not for everybody on this road. You may also note that your loved one or maybe yourself is experiencing some changes in their brain that are making it a little bit harder to have that experience of knowing what is happening within them and within their relationships. So be compassionate with the people that you know who are experiencing memory loss. And if you're one of those people, be compassionate with yourself. And I'm reading the chat right now. We had some feedback. Thank you. I had no idea how much I needed it. Yeah, it's one of those things we don't know we need it until we need it. It's good to see you on, Faye. Thanks for coming today. Dorothy, good to see you again. And I'm just going to leave the chat open for a few more moments. Hey, Vicki. If you have any questions about some of the topics that we had, please feel free to put them into the chat. And I also just want to mention that this is just a seed that we're planting today, that all these changes, changing our thoughts, changing our behaviors, is something that we have to nurture and develop and grow over time. So be patient with yourselves, even in the places that you find yourself frustrated or the places that you find yourself unable to get into, some of those karmic cubby holes that are really hard to shed a little flashlight inside of. That's part of the work of compassion too, is just being able to sit with that, acknowledge that. And once we're able to be with that a little bit more fully, a little bit more honestly, that we're offering nurturing and acceptance around those wounded places. As Oprah used to say, turning our wounds into wisdom. And because of that, the hurt spaces that you have, the ways that you've been suffering, your story is important. It's really important that you share your journey, whether you're a care partner, a loved one, or someone who's experiencing memory loss, that you start to offer up and become part of that shared humanity through not just keeping your experience to yourself, that you find and reach out and connect with other groups through the Alzheimer's Association, through the Emory Brain Health Center, that really can feel like a place that you feel comfortable to share. There's tons of support groups out there. Check with your local Alzheimer's Association chapter if you're looking for those. But I'm really excited to be able to just plant the seed this week with you guys to start turning your thoughts towards those seeds of compassion in order to start watering them. This is a Thich Nhat Hanh thing. And not just watering the weeds all the time, that we start to water the compassion and care in our lives that becomes generative to some of this growth that we're doing. And why do we do this? Because we want to live a life of peace, especially in the aging process. Why struggle this chapter of your life, especially if you spend all the other chapters struggling in perfection and trying to do things exactly the right way? Let this be a chapter of acceptance, of not struggling, of being more honest and open. Some of you that I know from the program are really open and honest about your journey, and what a blessing that has been to me and other people. And I encourage those of you who maybe have been a little bit more hesitant to cross that bridge or that threshold, to start just planting those seeds in your own life as well. Oh, it's really good to see people like Rick on the call. Yeah, something that we got to be reminded of. It's not going to come naturally. What's natural to our mind is to be protective and to be oriented into negative thoughts. That's what's natural for our mind. So we really have to make the choice to turn towards affirming the positive things that are still happening, the ways in which we are still so capable of so much, even with the changes of memory loss that are happening. So thank you all. Yes, everybody deserves it. It's your birthright to have joy and happiness and love, even after a stage of memory loss or after a big life change. So I encourage all of you to start to connect with some of these ideas and nurture them over time. So thank you all so much. That will be our talk for today. We'll post this later onto our YouTube page. You can find that through the Cognitive Empowerment Program, just a simple search on YouTube. And otherwise, we'll be back next week to talk about how to talk to others about a diagnosis of MCI. We'll be with Debbie Arnold and Suzette Benford from our Live Well program. So if you've been wanting to reach out to others, wanting to have this conversation with your family, if you've been reluctant, please join us next week. And otherwise, thank you all so much for joining. And thank you, Victoria, for hosting for the first time. It was really good to have her on and have her energy. I think you guys in the chat will agree. It was nice to have a new face on CEP Live. So thank you, Victoria.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
All right, we'll see you guys next week.